Welcome, Sister Gemma Ali from the UK to give the next presentation. Welcome, Sister Gemma. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, those online and also our fellow speakers. So without further ado, I will share my screen. Let me just find my presentation. Hopefully, inshallah, you can all see this. Okay, so my topic today is focusing on tayyib from an animal welfare perspective in Islam, and focusing on the modern livestock farming practices that we undergo around the world and how that has an effect on like the welfare insurance. My talk is mainly focused on livestock, but some of the welfare aspects as well within our industry do also include other areas, such as maybe cosmetic testing, if it's needed, or any kind of clothing that we get from animals as well, or any other byproduct from animals. Basically anything that involves those other species may also have some sort of compromise with animal welfare. So first of all, with my presentation, I'll go through a little bit, it might seem a little bit more personal about ethics and animal ethics, advocacy, and then I'll go into a little bit about those actual areas within the livestock industry and how that ties in with our halal industry as well. So first of all, I have a question for all of you, just to think about for a minute of how do you define animal welfare? Okay, so have a thing in your minds when you think of animals maybe that you eat versus animals that you own. Your welfare perspective may be a little bit different. Okay, so this actually differs between cultures. Here in the UK, we're known as animal lovers, whereas maybe around the world, animals are seen as more of just something for food or something that you farm. Maybe people don't have pets in their home. They don't see them as those kind of species that are welcomed within the home. But actually, if we look back through history, not just within Islam, but the other Abrahamic religions, animal rights were actually prescribed to us and taught to us within these scriptures before we had our modern day law that we create now. There's actually many hadith where the Prophet, peace be upon him, gives advice or like a lesson to something that he sees regarding an animal being treated a certain way. One example being he saw somebody taking some eggs from a nest, and the mother bird was behaving very erratically, obviously in distress, and the Prophet, peace be upon him, told them to put them back. So there's that lesson there that those animals do have sentience and they do have feeling, and the way that we treat them causes different emotions and reactions in them, the same as they would with us. So in the context of our food, obviously, as humans, we are given permission to use animals. It's said in the Quran, we can use them for food, transport, and hide. However, we have to be considerate of how we treat those animals. So within sacred law, animal cruelty or mistreatment is recognized as being wrong. Okay, despite us having that permission, we have to think about our iman and how we go about using those animals. So when we kill animals for food, it has to be minimal, not wasteful, and regulated carefully to ensure the procedure is painless as possible. As we know, our halal industry works tirelessly to have that halal slaughter as painlessly as possible. We're constantly changing our guidelines and our like halal standards to be able to allow animals to have a right and have welfare rights. And also, I think it gives a little bit of consumer confidence as well. Even non-Muslims now across the UK and Europe, they're starting now to think, oh, what is this halal? And actually they look into it, and some of them are starting to prefer halal because they think it's cleaner, it has an ethical standard, the animals are treated better. Although in non-Muslim countries, it's also viewed as being a barbaric industry. So we have those different, ends of the scale there. But something for us to consider as Muslims is that not having that waste. If we're using the animals it's fine, we have the permission, but we need to regulate it carefully and, you know, not cause them pain and suffering as much as possible. So within the sacred law itself, it does place many restrictions on how people can keep animals and treat them. We're actually, as humans, restricted from using animals in a way where we have human gain at the expense of animal welfare. So previously, in the previous presentation, we were talking about the halal integrity rather than the monetary gain. So this is where it will come into play with the animal itself as well. Obviously, the livestock industry, as we may all know, is a huge, huge industry. We are constantly supplying meat. So we need to be considerate of the animal welfare, even though it is a business and it does have monetary gain. Our human gain shouldn't overtake the animal rights, basically. So if we have a look at the issues that are raised, so the most common animal welfare issues that are raised by animal like advocacy groups is things like lack of space for animals, lack of sunlight, the restriction of like normal animal behaviors, farmers not recognizing sentience, or the industry as a whole not recognizing sentience of animals, and also genetics, so breeding animals to gain weight and muscle mass very quickly in order to supply our meat industry, which may cause other physical effects to the animal. So these are the main points. There are others, but these are the ones that are mainly pushed forward, especially to government level, where they would like the legal requirements of keeping livestock animals changed to not keep them in huge sheds, give them outside access, depending on the species this is, and to actually recognize that they are beings and they need to be able to behave as they wish in the wild. Of course, they're not bred in the wild. They are bred as livestock production animals. So there is a little bit of debate around there, but it's all about making them comfortable and recognizing that they do feel pain and suffering and disease the same as we would, and how would we feel if we were put in that situation. Okay, so if we have a look at some of the conflicts. So when we think of our industry as a whole, we have a growing population of people. We all have the right to buy meat, but we have a food security issue around the world. So now they're starting to research into those alternatives, such as the lab-grown meat. When you look into the industry, food security and animal welfare are always in constant conflict. At the end of the day, it is a business. We have a supply chain. We need to feed our consumers with their demand. And so where do we draw that line between how the animals are kept and what is being demanded by the industry? This is a constant conflict. But actually, when you look through some of the publications that have been made into animal rights in Islam, it does state that necessity does not void another's right. So this is where the human-animal conflict comes into play. Some demographics of people don't have the option to not eat meat. They need it for a nutritional requirement. So to them, it is a necessity, but it should not void the right of the animal.
No, Mary. Okay.
So
can bring me spray. A lot of ants.
And so it could be that it's a difficult subject, but not everybody, some have put forward the opinion that a vegan diet is a privileged diet. Generally, I'm not sure about everywhere around the world, but in the UK, when we seek the alternatives to meat to lower our consumption to help with animal welfare issues, actually those foods are more expensive. So people that are in a different demographic in the poorer country, they can't afford to have those alternatives for their nutritional requirement. They need the meat that they produce on their local farms. It's a very different way of living. So, but they may not have that cultural view or the education about that necessity voiding the other's right. Okay, so if we look at some of the influencing factors here, so again, demographic and location. So it may be that, you know, we can't sit here and put our personal views across around the world that all halal meats, for example, should be organically reared and you should only eat meat once a week. Organic meat here in the UK and across Europe is very expensive because of the time it takes to raise those animals and the input. Those people may not be able to afford that kind of meat, but they need those nutritional requirements. Okay, and even here in our more developed nations, people as a consumer will go for better value for money. If they see, for example, a chicken that it's got an ethical label, it says that it can perform natural behaviors, but you can get 2 for £15 rather than the one chicken for £20. Generally, the consumer behavior is that they would choose the 2 because they need to feed their families and they also have an income to budget like everybody else. And that's where we start with the factors of the food prices as well, and the cultural views on animals as well. But then, of course, we have this conflict between animal health versus welfare. So this is looking into the more tayyib factor. Some research papers discuss tayyib as being a separate entity to animal welfare. Some discuss tayyib as being the pure product to the animal itself and how it's raised. When you look through the research, if you look into like the intensive factory farming versus the free range versus the organic farming or the outdoor farming, there is often conflict between the ease of husbandry of the animals, because those in intensive farming will argue that the animals are in one place, they can control the disease easily, they can handle the animals easier, they can give them treatments easier. But then there is the argument on the other side that these animals have a lower immune system, or because they are so packed in these big densities, that if a disease does outbreak, there's, you know, catastrophic effects to the farmer, to the industry, to the animals. So there's this constant conflict here. And I think as a halal industry, we have to kind of decide where our boundaries are between the animal welfare aspects, but also the farmer and the demographic of where these animals are being raised and the location as well. So if we look at a wider picture, we are known as the caretakers of the earth. We were put here by Allah. We are seeing effects of from livestock farming of water pollution, zoonotic disease spread, so that disease spread between animal and human, antibiotic resistance, so depending on where you are around the world, routine use of antibiotics is allowed in production to keep disease at bay so the production can still continue. There is now a focus across Europe and the UK that we should not be routinely using antibiotics because of antibiotic resistance. I think it would be important to discuss using any of the use of those critical antibiotics to try and prevent this within our industry specifically. Of course, the cruelty to Allah's creations is being brought up by the animal advocacy groups. Animal welfare standards differ around the world depending on your law. The greenhouse gas emissions from livestock, and of course the land use itself. Okay, so this is a wider picture of all the things that could potentially be discussed and controlled within our industry specifically to give that tayyib integrity as we go down the supply chain. So if we have a look at modern livestock production, in some cases, routine mutations are used where animals are having their physical appearance adjusted, maybe to stop self-harm or harm of others within their housing. The Prophet, peace be upon him, forbade the castration and mutilation of animals. It is permitted under veterinary advice or if it is needed for a medical procedure. So just having a closer look at these mutations, are they being done because they need to be done or because it's just easy, you know, to keep the supply chain going? The same again for those antibiotics to be routinely used. Some farmers may use medicines to actually suppress disease rather than actually addressing husbandry and welfare issues on the farm. Okay, so it could be the case of needing more education, more awareness of animal health and behaviour to then try and prevent some of this disease spread and not needing that constant use of medicine. It is said within the scriptures that it's unlawful to unnecessarily harm an animal. This does not change because harming them costs less or increases efficiency. So this is a particular focus that has been discussed on intensive farming, especially where chickens are concerned. So they're often in tens of thousands in their population within a shed. Some of them do not go outside. They start to feel unwell, or because of the rate of growth, they start to have other physiological issues. So it's highlighting here that because it costs less to have that production system to get the meat into the market, it doesn't mean that it's our right as humans to allow this suffering to occur if we know it is occurring throughout the industry. Another point is mixed production. So in the the non-Muslim or the Western nations, a lot of our industry relies on non-Muslim farmers. So they may have mixed production systems. They are aware that we don't eat pork, but how in-depth their knowledge is to do with that mixed production, such as using pig manure on fields or housing them quite closely, it differs. So it could be quite a good incentive for the halal industry to actually educate non-Muslim farmers as well about our requirements. It's not just about having that separate production from slaughter onwards. We actually have some sort of requirement on the farm as well with regards to mixed production. And there's the use of AI and technology. Very good advancements, especially where animal welfare is concerned. It's really, really helping to monitor the health and welfare of animals if farmers can afford to install. However, from a Muslim perspective, where do we draw the line? Is it okay to keep packing animals so closely together and keeping them in these intensive systems just because a computer says the animal is okay? So we have to have a think about that from a religious and ethical perspective as well, about the ethical use of AI and technology. So if we have a look here about the industry at the moment, so we have halal feedstuffs, so we have halal certification for animal feed, and then we have our certification from the slaughterhouse onwards to do with the processing and packaging, so the tayyib comes into play with that cross-contamination. However, at the farm level, here our halal certifiers do not certify the farm directly. So we farm to the country's legislation where animal welfare is concerned in that production. Some farming practices may breach the sacred law. Okay, known low welfare and suffering is against Islam. Because we know it is occurring, we may be causing it, we need to start thinking about that boundary. And I feel the halal industry would benefit from their own animal rearing standards, even if it's a very small section. For the next generation of Muslims are becoming very aware of the issues with food security and animal welfare. And so they are looking for ethical labels. So if we can put the standards into place now, it will help with future generations. And why? Animal suffering, damage to human and environmental health with that antibiotic resistance, those zoonotic diseases, is starting to go against those Islamic boundaries. So as a whole, we could create a united world class industry of high welfare of halal if we address common ground issues within our countries. This could take place through research into areas of modern farming that are borderline with that sacred law, something that we could all address, align with UN goals and ethical livestock rearing. We could carry out project plans and cost-effect analysis because, of course, some nations are more developed than others. A phased approach through generations, maybe not now, but we are making the intention with Allah to improve this industry and the lives of animals and create that tayyib product. Education and training, not just within ourselves, but the consumer as well, and expanding or developing that halal certification. So just a recap. So purchasing meat with a known cruelty along the supply chain starts to go against that sacred law. If you don't know, you cannot be, it's halal for you. If somebody's put the halal stamp, we trust our fellow Muslims. But if you know there is cruelty, purchasing from that particular place is starting to compromise your sacred law. It will be beneficial to have training and understanding of basics of animal behavior and welfare, specifically at the animal level, and expand that monitoring or change the standards where we can. The changes, as I mentioned at the beginning, they're not exclusive to farming, so we should consider the live animal transport that goes on, and also any testing in the cosmetic industry. And we should be aware that affordable, high welfare meat needs to be available to all demographics. All of us as Muslims are entitled to have a halal and tayyib diet with high welfare. Just because somebody may be from a developing nation, it doesn't mean that we should start to compromise that sacred law because they need that nutritional value. We need to, try and work together, united as an industry together. And have that fair trade farming as well, looking after our farmers in the industry. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, my email address is there, and there's some QR codes there that feed to my website as well.
Thank you very much. Another insightful presentation, Sister Gemma. I'm glad today we started off with the basic foundation is required in the industry, which is amanah, and it's ended up with your presentation, Barakah. A very apt, and also I see that our next presenter, we started with the foundation of amanah from the HCB, and then we started from the source of the production, which is the animal, and